All right. Welcome back to another episode of Tech Stand Up Podcast. Today, I'm actually very honored to be joined by you, Mr. Chris Brogan. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
I just banged my hand on a desk. That's a good start. Hi, I'm Chris Brogan. I'm a business advisor, mostly around digital marketing, and I am a speaker and an author working on my 10th book right now. My business has, over the years, morphed in a few different directions, but in some way or another, I've always tried to help people figure out how can they use tech to drive better human interactions. How do we make business? How do you earn the right customers? That sort of a thing. And so I've worked with really small entrepreneur, like solo, and I've worked with the biggest guys in the world, like Google, Microsoft, Pepsi. The way that I try to go about doing all the stuff that I do is that one way or another, I want to help companies figure out how can they be part of like the busy story of a potential customer's life, business to business or business to consumer. Yeah. And how are they there at the right time, and what can they do to kind of earn the right to share, sell, and serve? And that's the kind of work I do. In the process, I mean, a lot of what I do is very solitary work. I am either in front of thousands of people, a few dozen people in a boardroom, or absolutely by myself in my house, looking at the walls. So it's a very interesting dichotomy or trichotomy, I guess, that way, is that it's not like regular work. I don't go to some office. I can spend the days in my underpants if I want in between trying to help people out. So
I'm not going to ask you to stand up, just so you know.
I got pants on today, but only because you're lucky.
So there's so many topics we could talk about, especially in the digital marketing space, and maybe for a future podcast, we can bring up a topic like that. But one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you is more of a personal nature for something that I've been battling with. And I still remember the first time we met out in San Diego and sitting in on your talk at Social Media Marketing World 16. And one of the things you had talked about is how you've battled with depression and how you've gotten out of that. And then it reoccurred to me again the other day after one of your Instagram posts, how you talked about making small changes, right, to kind of impact or change the mundane routine that you maybe feel like you're in. And that's something that happened to me after I was laid off from HPE / Micro Focus. Technically, I think it was Micro Focus, but that's semantics, I guess. I kind of found myself in that little bit of a rut. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things I want to say right up front is I was diagnosed with very mild clinical depression. Like a real professional said to me, this is close enough to what you have going on. This is what you have. When I say that, by the way, when I mention a diagnosis, first off, so few people go and take care of their mental health whatsoever. They do nothing. A lot of guys, especially, it is definitely a gender specific thing where guys feel like they need to be tough or something. There's a lot of stereotypes built around if you have mental challenges, then you're not a man and that kind of a thing. So there's that stigma in a lot of different cultures. Yeah. And I would say that a lot of companies don't know how to talk about it. When I talk to big professional companies and I say, yeah, sometimes I hit these sort of depression bouts. If you think about what a company needs from someone, their employee, or in my case, I'm a contractor, they just really want to know, are you still going to be on station? Like, can you do the job? Can you execute? Right. And they don't really, I've managed people. I care a lot about the people I've managed back when I worked in, real office jobs. And you don't want their whole life story professionally. You just really kind of want to know that they're going to develop, you're going to put them in the right kind of job, you're going to make the environment that they need to run their business. But, if they're sad because like their granddad died and, it's just taking them a lot longer to get over that, you have to empathize, you have to care. But as leadership, it's one of those things where you can't get too far into that rabbit hole because you have objectives. Yeah. I say all that up front, Luigi, because everything I want to talk about with regards to how do you get out of it and what matters and all that. When someone is in the funk or the depression or whatever, one of the feelings you tend to feel is kind of like, why aren't more people rushing in to help me? Why aren't more people saying the right things? As if somehow magically they would have like the script book that says, here's what Luigi needs. Yeah. And then I also say that to say, I find it very important to talk about things like depression and mental challenges, because I would say that so few business people do, and so many people try to hide it, and it doesn't help anybody. Like it helps nobody if we all just kind of act like I totally don't deal with that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
Um, and then that makes you feel worse. It's like looking at after pictures of like somebody with 6-pack abs, and on the left it shows them eating a bag of chocolate bars, and you're like, well, how did you eat all those chocolate bars and get 6-pack abs? And then you can never do it, right? Like, there's sort of a missing step in there of like, oh, and I did all this other stuff. So I really am down for talking about that, because I think that there's a lot of times for someone dealing with depression. Again, mine is very mild. There's people who have it way worse, and I don't take any regular medication, although I will talk about a kind of weird experimental medication. I can tell you that there are days when getting out of bed for a while, like beyond peeing, getting out of bed just a little is like, oh man, did I win today? And I would say that people don't understand that when they're thinking about these things. They're thinking you're just a little down. And why are you down? You have every reason to be happy. And then worse is, there's so many outside factors that click on it, right? Like there's all these things that might hit on us, like losing your job. Males, again, it's a very gender specific thing, but males really apply a ton of their self-worth to their employment. And so when they don't have a job, and when they're not the primary breadwinner for a minute, and when they are suddenly questioning themselves because every interview they go to is not clicking, you really start to think, I am a piece of crap. No one is ever going to like me again, ever. Because one of the great things about depression is it lies. And depression lies in very, everything is very polarity and extreme. I will never have a new job. I will never have the happiness I had before. I will never get out of depression. Oh, I put on weight. I will never lose this weight. Depression lies about that all the time. So I think it's, those are some starting points. And I think that the ways that we could talk about getting forward, not all of them are going to work for everybody. So if someone happens to be watching this who's dealing with their own depression, or listening, dealing with their own depression, they've got to know that, like, just because I say here's one way to do it, if you can't make it work that way, then you're going to have to go find a different way. It's all good.
Yeah, I would agree. For one of the major tech communities that I'm in is called the V community. It's around the virtualization technologies.
Sure.
They've actually been doing a great job of talking about that this year, about IT burnout. And so Eric Lee is a buddy of mine, Eric Shanks, Sonia Cuff out in Australia. She talks about that as well. And then when I was out at HP Discover, I talked about it just a little bit from my perspective and so forth. So people are starting to talk about it. And I know for me, it was relatively tough to, I have an extensive network. And I haven't done a great job of letting my network know, some of the challenges that I ran into. A lot of people still thought I worked for HP. All these months later, they're still like, I see them at a conference and they're like, wait, you're out at Dell World, like, or Dell Technologies World. How are you out here? Aren't you still with HP? And I was like, no, I haven't been out there in months. And I guess I'm fortunate for that regards. Is I kind of felt like that, is going to someone who they'll be like, well, Luigi, you get to travel all over the place to these blogger events and so forth. How can you be feeling down on yourself? And I'm very fortunate. I'm traveling again next week. This podcast will probably be published beforehand, but I'm fortunate I get to travel next week to Nashville for Commvault Go. But they're like, how are you down on yourself in that? And so I don't know if it's necessarily, it's very much so in a lot of organizations, but I think definitely in the technology one where it's very high stress, high demand take.
I think that, so I worked in IT for a while before I joined the weirdo circus of marketing and all that sort of stuff. I was a product support and release engineer in a wireless telecom. So my experience with that was, we were working sometimes, there's the law and then there's what we were doing. Some of us were working like 40 hours in a row, not, no sleep for 2 or 3 days sometimes during the process. And that was, I remember once telling HR something about that. Like, we were bringing in some new people for interviews, and we said, we have to know if they can stay up 40 hours straight. And she was like, that's illegal. And I said, well, we're doing it. And she said, All right. Well, that's a whole other conversation, and no one ever got back to it. So yeah, there could be huge burnout. The other problem too is that, I mean, there's just not less of anything in technology, right? Internet of Things is around. Virtualization is finally picked up in such a big way. Um, all of the sensor type networks, blockchain, there's just tsunami after tsunami of new things to learn and absorb. IoT security, by the way, they say that, you know, the S in IoT stands for security. So that means that people running networks are suddenly bombarded by people thinking that they really want Amazon Echo in their building or Google Home in their building, not realizing that they are using, they being hackers, are using the sensors in fish tanks to hack networks, because it's a wide open network, because who cares what the temperature of a fish tank is? But it turns out there's enough of an OS on that little digital sensor to go and attack a whole network. And I just read about that one the other day. So IT burnout is intense. The other thing is sort of job churn, right? So I haven't been an employee since, I guess, '07 or '08, I guess. I've run companies, but you know, the good side is that I'm master of my destiny. The bad side is that I don't always get a check. And I would say that both sides can be really stressful. If you're running your own company, you know what weeks end up being ramen noodle weeks.
Yeah.
If you are an employee, you serve at the behest of others. But when you're kind of like an indentured employee, when you've been somewhere a little while, you've got sort of tenure, so to speak, you forget how tricky it is to transition, how tricky it is to acquire a new role, how hard it is to switch cultures. I mean, HP has a thriving culture that's changed a bunch of times, but you cannot just plug from HP to Dell. Tons of reasons why not. You know, ultimately you would do great at the role, but you know, there's just all these sort of things in the way. And I think that none of it makes sense when someone's kind of just head down in their job. And I think that makes it harder. The other thing is that no one ever really wants to talk to someone while they're depressed, just as much as you don't want to talk to someone while you're depressed. You know, you don't want to be like, oh yeah, man, it's so awesome. Thinking maybe I'll bathe today, right? But meanwhile, they're thinking I've got to get these 5 servers put together because, you know, we're going to go live on this test and it's not ready yet.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that there's such a there's a lot of trains crashing into each other, and I think there's a lot of missing tracks as well in these communications. And I honestly, Luigi, I think it all just gets solved by calling it out a little bit more. A lot more communication, which is what we advocate in technology. Why would we not do it as humans?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think it's, I hate to bring up the mass shootings of the past and stuff, but I think as a society, they're more willing to talk about that, right? And then when I look at it from that subset aside, and I look at it just from what I go through and what I've been going through, I've been very fortunate that I have a very supporting wife who is also from Portugal, right? My wife is.
Yes. Yep.
So I have that translation. We were talking before the recording started about that. But my wife has been very supportive. And I've had a really close group of friends and family that I can talk to about anything. I could complain about my wife. I could complain about my kids. I can talk about the job hunt and so forth, what's going on there, or the business struggles, and I can be open and honest and not feel judged. And I think that's part of the reason people don't want to talk, is they feel like they're going to be judged if I say, you know, I'm having a problem with this, or if I openly say this, how is that going to impact me down the road? You know, and I have voiced my frustrations, and it may have hurt me in a future potential thing on Twitter, but I don't care. It's like, that's how I was feeling, and I did it. I said it.
It's gone. That horse has left the stable. Yeah. You know, really the one, there's a couple things I've learned about depression. One is that if you have a pretty decent network of people, and if you can explain to them what you need in those moments of depression, like I have a couple of friends that I just say, can you just remind me every now and again that depression's a liar? Because, you know, when you really start questioning yourself and you are just in that loop in your head of like, I am the worst, I'm never going to do anything or whatever, you need someone to go, man, you've done so many cool things. You are totally just in a slump, and depression's a liar. So we need a network for that. The other thing we need is, you know, The other problem with depression is, I call it that we just sort of look at our belly buttons a whole lot.
Yep.
There's a lot of belly button gazing in depression. You know, we look at ourselves a whole lot. And so I think the other thing, Luigi, to do is to really help other people when we're at our worst. Because when we are at our worst, there's always someone that we can help in some dumb little way, some easy way or whatever. Little kid out in front of the store collecting money for the youth hockey league, you know, whatever it is. You could be totally broke, but if you could scrounge $5 and make that kid feel good, you know, it's all right. I think that through service, this almost borders on religion, really, but through service, we get to a better place in ourselves, in our depression. And you don't avoid the depression, but you kind of, I'm just going to help some other people for a little while because I know I'm going to feel a little good. Yeah. And then when I can do this, I can bust out some of my habits and try to replace them with better ones. But I'm going to do this thing to get there. And that's important, I think.
Yeah, I think my wife is really good at that. She volunteers at the local food pantry here.
Nice.
And she does a lot of stuff. And she started out just translating. Now she does like scheduling, and she gets really involved in it. And we don't go to church or anything like that. And it's something that we've actually talked about is maybe we need to start attending a church. And one of our friends' churches, they like to go to, and they're very close friends. And we're like, well, maybe we'll check it out and see, just to kind of bring a different energy around. And so I'm not a religious person, but I'm an energies person. Sure. And I call like positive energy, I always refer to it as nerd blurt mojo. And
nice.
When someone loses a family, I say, I'm going to send you some nerd blurt mojo. And, you know, people would win things at conferences. And typically people would say, Luigi, I've won a lot of stuff at conferences. And they're like, you win everything. I was like, yeah, but it's not that. I embody a positive energy, and I try to project that and ultimately hope that good stuff will come back to me. Now, right. The last few months, I'd probably say I've been a little salty at times, and I'm trying to beat that away and get back to that. I guess find my nerd blurt mojo back, right? Find that positive energy again and be like, no, I can do kick-ass stuff.
Yeah.
It's been tough, and I really hammer back to, and if you don't subscribe to Chris Brogan's newsletter, you're truly missing out. And I'm not just saying this to plug it. I personally get a lot out of it. The things that you talk about, because you bring a lot of real life scenarios into it where you and Jackie are having breakfast somewhere, and you just have this thought, and how this interaction at breakfast with your fiance translates back into a thought process within the business, right? And again, right. We're professionals, and I want to help other professionals. So I get a lot out of it. But you mentioned here earlier talking about the small victories, right? And one of the presentations I give is I talk about that, celebrating those small victories. And sometimes people don't want to celebrate the small victories. Right. Why would you think that is? That they only want to celebrate the big win?
You know, when you're kind of going through challenges, it's amazing what equals a big win. I said, and I think people may or may not have watched and thought he was just being kind of funny, but legitimately, sometimes getting a shower is the best win I can do. You know what I mean? That's it. I'm up. You know, and so I think that if you look at that and you're like, oh, you're going to give yourself credit because you gave yourself, you showered. Whoa, aren't you amazing? You know, I get it. On the other hand, I think what matters is that you can, if you start seeing just some small, simple little wins, you're going to be able to stack them, and you're going to be able to say, wow, I'm hitting some little things here. I think I could take another bigger step. I could take a bigger step. We need confidence, and confidence comes from wins, right? And so I don't mind playing in please don't hurt me mode in Doom for a little while if I'm going to get to the part where I can up the skill level, you know? So I think that when we start angling ourselves towards, you know, really delivering some value again, really just being, you know, super nerd blurt Luigi level. I think what comes before that a lot of times is that sense of, you know, here I am, I'm on my move, I'm going to push up some successes, and then I'm going to take a swing.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be okay if I miss on this one, but I'm going to take another swing really quick while I still have this mental momentum. And that's when you win, right? You win. It's like getting your car unstuck from snow or something. You win once that little first click turns into the second click, and then everything is delightful.
Yeah, yeah. So I had that happen just recently, and I'm open to discuss it. And people will probably say I shouldn't, but so recently I applied for a job with a company. I won't mention the company. People can figure out the story if they follow my tweets. But I since deleted the tweet, which I don't normally delete a tweet, but on the advice of my good friends, I typically own what I say, and I took a swing for the fences, and the part I could have worded what I had said differently to be a little more positive, but at that time, I was feeling kind of in a low, right, and
Yep.
feeling frustrated, like how am I not good enough for what was going on to be like, yeah, let's at least give this kid a call, right? So I tweeted something out there, and it got some attention, not like super viral attention, but ultimately the hiring manager saw this and he didn't like it so much. And I haven't spoken to him. I did end up speaking to a recruiter, and as far as I know, and from what I've heard from some of my connections that put their names out for me, that it may not go further because of that.
Okay.
But at that same token, is like I own what I said. I did the action. It's not how I conduct a business, but it's my personal stuff, right? And that's how I was feeling. I was feeling kind of like WTF, like what can I do to actually catch a break? Right?
I get that though. It's sort of this weird feeling of like, who do I got to kiss around here to get the job? And, you start to say some kind of crazy things because you're like, look, I am a really, really good candidate for this. And yeah, it's questioning yourself is just so easy in those moments
Yeah.
and figuring it must be that you're wrong. The only way I ever reframe that for myself is I really try to get even closer to what their needs are. And I try to really articulate their needs as best as I can.
Yeah.
Just so that they really get the feeling, oh my gosh, this guy like lives and breathes the thing I'm trying to fill. Because, especially with hiring people, this may sound negative towards hiring people, and that's because that's not my intention. Hiring people have a job. Like their job is to like fit the things that they can read on the requirement that 3 really busy people wrote them that no one wanted to do. No one wants to write the job application up internally. You know what I mean? The job rec. No one at the company who's working really hard really wants to spend the time to write a great job rec. Then the hiring person has to turn that into something useful. Then the hiring person has to try to match 10,000 resumes to that, really crappy job rec. And then they have to ask lots of questions in technical, usually about stuff they don't really understand. And there's nothing more frustrating for a technical asset to be talking to a HR person that just doesn't feel like they understand the first clue of what you're trying to convey.
Yeah.
You're trying to get to the first interview though. And so my recommendation in those moments is to communicate the words that would sound like you were the right kind of person to get to the first interview, so that once you get another Luigi across the table from you, then you can spill your passion. Because they'll know really quick if they want to work with that. I mean, when I was hiring in my IT group, we had a product support release engineering team. We'd have people with incredible degrees, and we hated every one of them, every single one of them. We very often hired people with nothing more than a Windows NT server certificate or an NT 4.0 back in the day certificate. And we would hire them from, one guy was a funeral director, one guy was a moving company guy. And they were 2 of our best hires ever because they had the drive, not the paper. And they would never have lived through the current HR system because of that.
Yeah.
All they had to do was get to the first interview. So to me, that's that other thing with small victories. Just get to the first interview, and then you can wow people. Because if they're going to know you're passionate or not, they're going to find out real quick.
Yeah. No, so that my wife, again, I can't stress how much I love my wife.
Yeah.
She's mentioned that too, is like, and I started to look at it as a small victory. Hey, my application didn't get immediately rejected by some system, right? And I will say that with this one particular recruiter, off that story I said, she was actually really nice, and she provided me some good feedback and said, she's like, I can hear, like she could hear my passion for what I was talking about, but she's like, Luigi, your resume doesn't reflect what you're telling me and the stuff
Right.
that you're doing. So that's where I need to go back to the drawing board and so forth. So while it was a a swing and a miss. I think it was
Sure.
a good at bat, right? Because I didn't just go three strikes, right? I went full count and then
There
grounded
you go.
something. And that's the way I'm taking it. And I'm trying to take that feedback. And that's what I like. I like honest feedback, right? There's other interviews where I went on and you don't hear anything. And I think that silence is what
It's the
really,
worst.
I think, yeah, when you don't hear something and you're like, tell me good or bad. Like I've had people provide me feedback, in the hiring process, and some of it they're like, "You're great, you're excellent. We just need a different direction with our resource. Even though we need someone like you, we need someone." And I'm like, and that's where I commented out on the other day. I tweeted out, "Always a bridesmaid, never a bride," right? Because that's how I was feeling at that moment.
Sure.
I just did really great on what I felt between a series of interviews because you're not just doing one or two interviews, you're doing like 4 or 5 interviews.
Absolutely.
You hammer it out the park, the hiring manager loves you, and then it's like, but well, it's like everyone loves you, you'd be a great fit for the role, but it's like it's frustrating, and it's tough not to get back into that, or it's tough to easily, what's the word I'm trying to look for, fall
It's
back.
easy to fall back into the sludge, right?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And just to say, fuck it.
Yep. Nobody loves me. Everybody hates me. I'm going to go eat worms. Um, yeah. The thing that makes salespeople successful, whether or not we love, the role ourselves, the thing that makes a salesperson successful is that they don't sit around listening to the no. They're like, oh, how do I reposition this? How do I reposition this? How do I get this to make sense? If the salesperson, and like the difference between a good and a bad salesperson is if the salesperson says, this is the only reason they're saying no is because they don't really get that this is really the thing. If they then have to reposition until they get them to figure it out. I was thinking about the fact that in a lot of ways, the hiring process, Luigi, is a lot like taking a pill, right? Like if you had to take a medicine comes with a coding for a reason. The most important part of the medicine is inside that coding, but you got to get through a big system to get that thing delivered to where it needs to go inside the body. We're just not that good at targeted medicine yet. So that coding has to protect it all the way through all the annoying stuff so you can deliver the payload to the actual area that needs the hit. So the hiring process ends up feeling like that. You've got to put a better coding on everything that you're doing because you know that once you get to the right person, you're going to deliver in a way that's going to make them say, I totally need you. So that's my recommendation there is think of coding.
I totally agree, but I got to shift focus back because we're starting to go down a page on the process. Is when you start to feel down and so forth, what are 2 things that someone can do to start to feel better about themselves and start to get themselves out of that momentum of the downward spiral and kind of just stopping, even if they just stop and plateau instead of that, trajectory down?
One thing we do a lot when we're down is we absorb a lot of time. Like we just go hours on everything, like we get really in the mud for hours. Jack has this thing, my fiance, she has this thing where she says, you know what, set an egg timer. Why don't you give yourself 10 minutes? And why don't you be really down for 10 minutes and then go do something? Don't care what. And I'm always like grumpy when I do that. Like, I'm not doing that. And then it's not here next to me, but I have a little ladybug egg timer, like a real physical world egg timer that looks like a ladybug. And I set her for 10 minutes. And when she goes, I go, okay, fine. And I'll get up and I'll go for a walk or I'll do something. So one thing is to set a timer, no matter what number you want to put on it, because we're like an alligator growing, we'll use whatever space you give us. So if you make the space really small for that depression, then you're going to be a little bit better off. You're like, okay, fine. I set the timer. Okay, now I'm going to go do X. The other thing is, and people, I don't know why we don't do this more, make some simple checklists. Don't make them very full. Don't make them major, but make some simple checklists of a few things you can do when you feel like you're going to just take some energy and use it for something. It could say, go for a walk. It could say, send 3 emails, send 5 comments on LinkedIn. Right? Like if you're job hunting or whatever, do whatever the thing is. That is there just a couple of little wedges you could chip at it and then keep going. In video games, there's the grind, right? We really want to get our guy to a certain level, or we really want to, finish this puzzle or something like that. Well, in video games, there's feedback for that grind. You've done 2 out of 5. You got to go get the 3rd one. You've done 3 out of 5 now, right? But there's an out of 5 sitting there looking at us, right?
Yeah.
We humans almost always can fabricate that same sort of feedback if no one's giving it to us. So give yourself feedback. We crave feedback. So set a timer, give yourself feedback. There's my 2.
All right. I appreciate it. So with that, we're coming up towards the end of the podcast. Are there any last words?
Yeah. So one thing I mentioned at the very beginning is that I'm not on any particular medications for depression. Some people really need a good medication for depression, but I did try, and I appreciate, and I'm about to go re-up on it, an experimental thing for depression. And it's a drug called ketamine, which is officially a horse tranquilizer and is evidently some kind of party drug. Because when I was telling a couple of friends about it, they were like, that's like, they give that out at raves and stuff. And I was like, nope. And what it does, like I took it twice with a doctor in a doctor's office. To me, it was like, it was really kind of a crazy inside your body kind of an experience where everything felt warm and fuzzy and my eyes stopped working normally. It's almost like when you push your fingers on your eyes really hard and you see those like green and yellow lines and all that. It was like that, but my eyes were open. And I went through like quite a feeling. And what happens evidently is something in the ketamine shakes loose some kind of depression or whatever, and you like come out the other side good for like a bunch of months at a time. Now, it is super experimental. It is almost never covered by anyone's medical insurance. I had to pay cash for it. Very few doctors are into doing it right now, but you can look around. I mean, mine's up in Newburyport, Massachusetts. But there's resources online to look around for which doctors do it. And I'm not saying that's the one for you. Medical marijuana. There's all these new things out there that help people dealing with depression, but sometimes medicine is the requirement. And I'm not ever going to tell someone don't try medicine, but also remember that when you go to your doctor and you say I'm feeling depressed, they're going to give you whatever meds are the current going least complained about med. It is not ever going to be custom fit for you. It is never going to be something that they really took your physiology into account. Or your exact specific thing. And they have so many patients they got to get through. They're not really thinking too hard on it anyway. They're thinking, how do I not get in trouble? Period. Yeah. Right? So you have to be your own doctor on this one. You have to advocate. And I don't mean self-medicate, please, Lord. But should you decide you might want to look at some medicine, you got to go do some research and say, what's going to work for me? And I think that there's I've been reading a lot of research on medical cannabis and that sort of thing. And there's just so much information in there that was suppressed for the last 60 plus years that I think I've never done drugs in my life. And I've suddenly gone, oh, well, I don't know, maybe this is something different. And I think people need to look at it. So that's my kind of parting words is just, if you think you might need some chemical help, don't presume your doctor is going to give you the right thing, and do some searching and see if you can figure out what might be a good plan for you.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Is I would say make sure you're informed and researching with the doctor. Sometimes even just talking to a therapist could help someone.
Absolutely.
Feel you need that. And my son is actually, he works for a marijuana dispensary.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast. I'm actually going to have him, I might have to talk to him on 2 podcasts.
Yeah.
Son is 22, and we're going to talk in a future one on esports because he's
sure.
FIFA and stuff. But I may bring him on and talk the cannabis stuff, even though I'm not into it.
Yeah,
someone is.
same.
But with that, until next time, folks.